continuing this theme on having a faith that matters. Okay, having a faith that matters. And today we're going to be looking at the story of the centurion here in Luke chapter 7. But before we get into that, I kind of like the opening question in your quarterlies where it says, who is someone in your life who could always get your attention? Who's somebody in your life that could always get your attention?
My dad.
Your dad? Your parents?
Yep.
Okay. How many of you could say my dad? Okay, several of you. Why? Why could your dad get your attention?
Because of his authority.
Okay. Somebody read the lesson. Daggone. Yeah. Right? I hate to say this with my mom being with us this morning, but Mom had a certain level of being able to get my attention, right? But then Dad had another level of being able to get my attention, right? And whenever Mom couldn't get my attention, she would appeal to Dad to get my attention, right? And a lot of
Dad didn't even have to speak. And I think what it was is I was aware of his authority. So if I knew he was in the area and I was doing something wrong, you always glance, and he would always be looking.
Yeah.
And he never spoke a word.
Yeah. Exactly, and that's part of it. Sometimes my dad didn't have to speak either, Kenny, to get my attention. Whenever I was a kid growing up in church, my dad had a finger that was he lost part of a finger in a tractor accident when he was a kid, and so, but it had this little bone sticking out of the end of it. And it was but anyway, he could reach across Mom or my brother Doug or whoever and flick me on top of the head with that. Come on. During church, it was a very effective tool at getting my attention. You know what I mean? Whenever I was maybe misbehaving a little bit there, sitting in the pew or whatever. But I mean, it's like, and the last thing you want to do is make any noise, because you were already getting thumped because you were probably making noise. But yeah, and there's other people that are like that in our lives. But oftentimes, people that are in position, we recognize authority, and authority, because of that, it gets our attention. And this is one of several stories that Luke gives us to give us evidence to who Jesus is. He's presenting and painting for us almost a portrait, if you will, of who Jesus is. And this comes on the heels of an extensive teaching session that we just had that we're going to talk about here in just a second. But Jesus was clearly a person of authority, and people were recognizing that. But how do we yield to that authority? And that's part of what makes faith a true faith, is when we yield to authority, when we look to Jesus, when we acknowledge the authority of Jesus, and then when we exercise faith in Him, that brings Him great pleasure. And so that's kind of what we're going to be looking at this morning. But the second question I want to ask you before we get to the passage is, where does our culture encourage us to turn when difficult problems arise? Whenever we face difficulties or hardships, where does our culture say to look for help?
Government.
Okay, government. Yep. And there is a lot of help out there that's available to people, right? In that, there are programs, there are things that people can get help. Sometimes when they need. Where else are we encouraged to turn for help?
Self-help.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing. It's either government, and then probably number two is just yourself.
YouTube,
Okay, well, yeah, I'll amend that. So YouTube is probably second, right? So the government, and then if you don't know how to do something, the first place you look is YouTube, and you can But even then, it's so that you can do it, right? So you don't have to go get somebody else's help. You don't have to get an expert. You don't have to pay the mechanic or pay the plumber or pay the carpenter. Maybe you can do it on your own, Somebody on YouTube will tell you how to do it, Which, don't get me wrong, it's a great tool.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely love it. Even where I work, it's one of the things that's automatically on all our computers, and they're like, yeah, look at YouTube. Go, can't figure out how to do it, go look on there. And so, anyway, so yeah, a couple different places there. Well, the best place to turn when we need help is Jesus. We need to look to Jesus. So somebody read for us Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 5.
When he had concluded saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. A centurion's servant who was highly valued by him was sick and about to die. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders to him, requesting him to come and save the life of his servant. When they reached Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy for you to grant this, because he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue."
All right. So, don't you love it whenever we start off a passage and it's in the midst of a transition? Right? I mean, I don't know why they do that, why it happens that way so often, right? But it's like, when he concluded saying all these things, then this happened. Well, we obviously need to know what just happened in order to understand this. And this is part of why I said earlier that Luke is painting a portrait for us. He's trying to show us Jesus. He's trying to reveal to us who Jesus was. And if you go back and you look at chapter 6, basically what you're going to see in chapter 6 is a very interesting way that Luke is portraying Jesus in chapter 6. Okay? And the way that Luke has presented Jesus in chapter 6 is he's presented Jesus as a person of authority. Okay? At the very beginning of chapter 6, Jesus is going into synagogues, right? Well, first off, when you first get into chapter 6, Jesus and his disciples are walking through grain fields, and they're stripping some grain, and they're eating it. And the officials come to, the synagogue officials, and come to him, and they're like, "Why are you sinning on the Sabbath?" And he goes into that talking about, well, David did this. He went into the temple and ate consecrated bread and gave it to his friends that were with him, right? And so we see authority there, right? He's challenging that authority. Then, and another, right on the heels of that, he's back in the Sabbath again, and they're beginning to wonder, is he going to heal somebody? And there's a man with a withered hand, and Jesus says, is it good to heal or to destroy on the Sabbath, right? And he tells the man, come forward, he speaks the word, the withered hand is restored, and they are furious, right? He's establishing him as a person of great authority. And then, immediately, again, on the heels of that, what do we see next? The choosing of the 12. I thought we already chose the guys last week. Didn't we do that in chapter 5? They left everything and they followed him. But then in chapter 6, which we're skipping over, we get Jesus going up on a mountain, praying all night, coming back down, gathering all these followers around him, and then it says, and then he chose 12. He chose Peter, Andrew, Judas. It lists out all of them. Matthew says, and he chose them. He's placing another distinct call on them. And so again, what are you seeing? Authority. He is a person of authority. And then he goes into this long, he comes down from there, they get on the plane, and he begins to go into the Beatitudes. One of the things I really love there, though, in that whole discourse is verses 17 through 19, where it says, this is right after he's chosen the 12. It says, Jesus came down with them, and he stood on a level place, and there was a large crowd of his disciples and a great throng of people from all of Judea and Jerusalem and the whole coastal region of Tyre and Sidon, who had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. And those who were troubled with unclean spirits were being cured. And listen to verse 19. And all the people were trying to touch him, for power was coming from him. And they were all being healed. authority, right? I mean, he is showing authority over disease, over sickness, over unclean spirits. And people are just like, if we just touch him, if we just get close, these things are happening. So, that's the setting. That's the portrait on which Luke lays this encounter with this centurion on top of. And so there in verse 1 it says that when he has concluded saying all these things to the people who were listening, he's going on his way back into Capernaum. And then we get this interaction. A centurion's servant, who was highly valued by him, was sick and about to die. And so this centurion has heard about Jesus, and now he sent some Jewish elders to him requesting that he come and save the life of his servant. What do you... Okay, so just one quick note, and I'm going to ask some questions. It's very interesting to me that every time we encounter a centurion in the New Testament, they are always shown in a positive light. I don't know why that's unique to me, but that's very unique to me. That every time you encounter a centurion, they're positive. Whether it's this centurion in this story, whether it's the centurion that's standing guard over Jesus at his crucifixion when he makes the proclamation, truly this was the Son of God, or whether it's the centurion later on that's going to help Paul escape and get out of town whenever they're coming to get him, they're always shown in a positive light. But what do you, other than that, what do you appreciate about this centurion that you know of so far in this story? Just in these verses, what do you appreciate about this centurion?
I think he was following Jesus as far as the teachings of the masses that were attending, and noticing some people are the kind that sit back and take in information. Mm-hmm. And this is how I would describe him.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And his maybe first-hand accounts, seeing the people that he might have known that were disease-ridden or had evil in them, and seeing that flee from them.
Right.
And it was his faith, and he had to surrender to it in order to ask for it.
Okay.
I think he also shows a respect of the authority that Jesus does have. You
Okay.
understand it.
Okay. Anything else? That's all good stuff. What else? Anything else?
He highly valued his servant.
I like that a lot.
He highly valued someone who most people at the time would have thought was just that.
Right. And that's important to note. I think that speaks to his character a lot. You know what I mean? This servant was probably not just a servant. This was probably a slave. Mm-hmm. Servant's probably a nice way of saying this is somebody that he may have actually owned, right? That was a servant to him. But he cares about him. And he doesn't just kind of care about him. He was highly valued. I would venture to say he loved this servant. You know what I mean? He's going to do whatever he can, right, to help his servant. He wants his servant, he's requesting Jesus come save his life, right? I mean, that's really, really cool, right? What else is impressive about him? I think the other thing that's impressive about him is the relationship that he has with the Jewish people. Right? For the most part, Jews and Romans don't get along.
No.
Right? There is an animosity, at least, and especially from the Jewish side toward the Romans, right? There is an animosity there. They don't want them there. They don't want them around. But yet, this centurion is able to reach out to elders in the elder Jewish people and say, hey, would you go ask him to come and help me? You know what I mean? And so, and their response about it is when they reach Jesus, they basically start begging Jesus to go on behalf of the centurion.
He humbled himself. He humbled himself.
Yeah, but I think in this part, I think that's just his nature. I think here is a person of authority himself, a person of power, a person of prestige, and he's kind of endeared himself to this whole community. Even before Jesus is on the scene, he's endeared himself to this whole community. They like him. And part of the reason they like him is because he built us a synagogue. Okay? But that in and of itself is very unusual. You know what I mean? That this Roman centurion, this Roman citizen, would do something like help build a synagogue in the town of Capernaum. You know? So, a lot of good character traits that we see there in him. But with everything that he had, he still didn't have what it took to help his servant. And so, in that moment, he decides that he is going to humble himself even further and ask for help.
Do you think when he did that it got back to other people of Rome, authorities, seeing his behavior with the Jewish people and stuff, and how well they meshed and how they respected each other?
Yeah, I don't know for sure. I don't know. I don't know. I don't really have an answer to that for sure.
Steve, as he's recognizing the authority that he has over other individuals, it's like he has, in his faith, he's recognized Jesus as having authority in a whole another realm.
Yeah.
That he doesn't have.
Yeah, and I think that's important, and I think that's why Luke has built this picture for us. And he says, and now I'm seeing, and by the way he structured it, all these events, and then he lays the story in on top of it, right? And so but it's interesting that Luke says about the centurion, he doesn't say that he saw Jesus. It doesn't say that he saw any of these things happen. What does it say? He heard about it. That is even more impressive. But then again, that lays in with what we know about faith. Because faith comes by hearing. Right? And he heard about Jesus, and he turns to Jesus, and he asks for help. How bad does a situation have to get before you turn to God for help?
Sometimes rock bottom.
Huh?
Sometimes rock bottom.
Sometimes rock bottom. Yeah. Sometimes that's where it's at, right?
I mean, he's hearing these things. It's like the second story that's coming to him. He's taking these things in. He's curious. It's like when people that maybe an unbeliever that you may have contact with, they know to seek you, they know you'll pray for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
He knows where to go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What else? How bad does a situation need to be before you turn to God for help?
Sometimes after I've spent days trying to figure out it's a problem that I can never come up with an answer, so like, okay,
Yeah.
show me what it is.
Yeah, I think that's just it, right? It just varies from circumstance to circumstance, right? Sometimes it depends on where we're at in our life. Sometimes it depends on the situation. Sometimes we run quick, right, to Jesus. Sometimes we get rock bottom. Sometimes it's somewhere in between, right? But,
It's at the point where we recognize that we can't do it ourselves.
right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's cool that this centurion, a person of authority himself, like you guys have talked about, he's manifested this humble attitude by asking others to help him in a time of need. Because he's not just going to he's not really just even where we're at right now, he's not just humbled himself before Jesus. He's also humbled himself in a certain way with just the Jewish elders in the town by asking them for help. Right? He's involved them. He said, hey, would you go ask him for me? Right? Would you go and see if he would come? So there is this level of humility in this time of need, and for that alone he is to be commended. But he looked to Jesus for help, and I think that is a critical part here. Look to Jesus for help, and then faith is going to recognize the authority of Jesus. Somebody read verses 6, 7, and 8 for us.
Jesus went with them, and when he was now far from the house, the Caesarian sent friends to tell him, Lord, don't trouble yourself, since I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof. That is why I didn't even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under my command. I say this to one, go, and he goes, and I say to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it.
Okay, so I want to hold on real quick, because I know we want to run real quick to verses 7 and 8, but I want to spend just a second on verse 6, okay? How does Jesus respond to the request of the centurion and the appeal of the elders? He just goes, right? It's interesting that there's no questioning, there's no, anything. It's just, he goes, right? He just goes with them. And there's something to appreciate about that. When we turn to Jesus, have you ever went to somebody for help and they didn't have time to help you? Jesus always got time, guys. When you go to Jesus for help, he's not going to put you on a wait list. He's ready and able and willing to help immediately. Does that mean the answer or you know what I mean, or what you need is going to happen immediately? No, but in one form or another, help is on the way. When you ask Jesus for help, help is on the way. It may not come in the form that you ultimately are hoping for it to come, right? But just know this. When you ask for help, help is on the way. And that may come, maybe not in a direct answer to whatever the need may be. Maybe it's just going to be strength. Maybe it's just going to be peace. Maybe it's just going to be, I don't know what. But I know this. When you ask for help, help is on the way. Okay? And then the next thing I want to ask is this. What causes the centurion to change his mind? Some of you are looking at me going, what? When did he change his mind? Well, along the way, he's changed his mind. He's asked them to bring Jesus to his house. That was the initial request, right? See if Jesus will come to my house. And now all of a sudden, it's, don't come.
He doesn't think he's worthy.
Okay? And that is in contrast to what the elders just said. Because the elders have just appealed to Jesus based on what?
His worthiness.
His worthiness. So the elders say, hey, he's worthy of your help. Come and help him. But his own view of his own self is, I'm not worthy. Okay? I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof, right?
Shouldn't that be our reaction anytime we come face to face with the Lord? The closer we get to Him, the more we realize we're not worthy of anything.
Yeah. And there is a little, that is absolutely so true. But there is a little bit of a difference in the two words that are used. There's a difference in the words that the elders use when they describe him as being worthy, and there's a difference in the word that he uses when he describes himself as being unworthy. The elders had said he was worthy, and he said, I'm not. They're two different words. And the first word is a word that's focused on merit. The elders say he merits your favor. He's a good guy. He's done good things for other people, and based on his merit, you ought to come and I don't know whether they thought heal or at least come and visit, come and see, maybe. But really what the centurion's attitude when he says, I'm not worthy, he's almost saying, it's a mark of, I'm not important enough. Right? I'm not important enough to have you enter into my house. And this was a mark of true humility on his part. There's some people, and I've kind of thought this myself a little bit, I kind of think that there's a possibility that maybe he's thought about this and he's like, it's not proper for a Jewish person to come into a Gentile person's house, because if they come into a Gentile person's house, they're considered unclean. They've been defiled. But I don't really think that's really the case here, because if we know anything about Jesus, he doesn't care about all their all their designations, right? He's more than happy to interact with women. He's more than happy to interact with lepers. He's more than happy to touch dead people. You know what I mean? He doesn't care about all their ceremonial, what's clean, what's unclean type of things. But just in general, what do you appreciate about the centurion's posture toward Jesus here?
I'm going a different direction with this, Steve. He says he's not worthy, but yet he's still asking for help.
For his servant.
For his servant.
He wasn't asking for help for himself. He was passionate about his servant.
Mm-hmm.
Compassionate about his servant.
Yeah. So what conviction does he have about Jesus at this point, do you think?
He believes Jesus is able.
Mm-hmm.
And not based on this centurion's worthiness or his goodness or whatever. Jesus has just talked about, blessed are those who are poor in spirit.
Right.
Recognize their deficit spiritually.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great tie-in. And so how does he illustrate that conviction then? Well, he illustrates that conviction by how he responds next. Right? I love this, right? Just say the word. You could preach a whole sermon on that, right? You could preach a whole sermon on that phrase. Just say the word, right? I love that about this centurion and his response now. I got to turn back just so I can read the passage again, okay? He says, that's why I didn't even consider myself worthy to come to you. So here again, there's that, you know what I mean, humility. He's like, I'm not pulling rank by sending people to you and saying, come to me. He's saying, I didn't even come to you because I didn't consider myself even worthy just to come to you, right? But then he says, but say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under my command. I say to this one, go, and he goes. To another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it. Say the word. I'm having a hard time here. So how is this faith of the centurion expressing itself?
He believes that Christ has the power over health and death that he has over his troops and slaves.
Mm-hmm.
He has absolute power over things that the centurion doesn't have power.
Right. Yeah. What else, guys? Other thoughts?
Well, he still didn't go. These are his friends, he said. Right? So it's just so interesting that he still didn't go.
Right. But even in that, I think there's a level of that amazes me, right? Because it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. He didn't see any of this. We don't even know if he ever saw Jesus, which I'm pretty sure he probably did, eventually, somewhere along the way. But all of this is all about this, just hearing, this interaction, this conversation, this discourse that's happening in this exchange of messenger. Right?
Yeah. No, I'm trying to save my voice for later.
Okay.
But we talk about this, and it's keyed right in what you're saying. When everybody's saying he heard,
Yeah.
he heard about Jesus and he believed, and Jesus expounds upon this when he says, "You believe because you've seen, but blessed are those who believe me without seeing, for theirs is the kingdom."
Yeah.
And it's just a key in.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you make a great point when you said that he believes that Jesus has the power over his sickness. He believes that Jesus has the power to do, you know what I mean? He basically says, hey, you are a person in authority, and I am recognizing your authority. I don't know, I may not have a full understanding of who you are, but I know enough to know that when you speak, things are happening. And all you have to do is say the word, and my servant will be healed.
It's like the centurion is a leader of troops.
Mm-hmm.
He has business.
Mm-hmm.
He has authority over people, rightful authority based on the government and law. He has the proper spirit to always be looking out for his people, the people he's in charge of. He recognizes the righteous authority of Jesus, and then realizes, yeah, I called him to come, and realized I'm not worthy for him to come. His time is more valuable than anything.
Yeah.
He would just consider.
Yeah. And there is an element of that. That's a great point, David. There is an element in there almost that as a man that's probably been put on mission before, sent on missions, he is maybe even recognizing that Jesus has a greater mission and I don't want to distract from that.
Exactly. He just wants to be considered at the moment.
Yeah.
That he needs to do.
I'll do whatever I have to do to help my servant whom I love. I think you can say that he loves his servant, right? I'm going to do this, but I don't need to distract him from all this other stuff that he's doing. Because Jesus doesn't go. Jesus stops, and he never goes to the house. I mean, the guy gets healed, right? But he doesn't go, and he continues on with his work and all that type of thing. All right. Well, all warm and fuzzy. So let's get uncomfortable. Somebody read verses 9 and 10.
Jesus heard this and was amazed at him, and turning to the crowd following him, he said, I tell you, I have not found so great a faith even in Israel. When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the servant in good health.
Okay. Jesus affirms our faith when we acknowledge his authority. And a really cool thing happens here, right? In verse 9, we get, it says, when Jesus heard this, whenever Jesus now hears this statement, it says he was amazed. Okay? He was amazed by the faith of the centurion. This is a word that Luke likes, just so you know. Luke likes the word amazed. Luke uses the word amazed a lot in his gospel. In Luke chapter 2, verse 18, it identifies, it's the same word he uses there to identify the amazement of everybody who hears the shepherds. That hears what the shepherds say. They are amazed at what the shepherds say. They're blown away. What in the world are these crazy shepherds talking about? Okay? That's the same word. It's also the same word that he uses for Mary and Joseph's response to Simeon at the temple. They are amazed at what Simeon's telling them, at what Simeon is pronouncing about their child Jesus, right? It's the same reaction that the disciples have when Jesus calms the storm. When Jesus speaks the word and the wind and the waves stop, the disciples are amazed. And it's also the same word that the Jewish religious leaders use whenever they try to trap Jesus in their questions, and he has all the right answers, and they're just blown away. They're amazed. They're like, we can't get up on this guy. We're just amazed. Finally, at the end of Luke, chapter 24, verse 41, it's the same word that expresses the disciples' amazement at the resurrection of Jesus. They are amazed. So more often than not, throughout the book of Luke, people are amazed at him. But here, Jesus is amazed by the centurion. And that is very, very unique. And it causes me to pause. It causes me to wonder. Is Jesus ever amazed by my faith? It's a cool notion to me that, like your quarterly says, that the King of everything would marvel at somebody's faith. But it speaks to the fact that Jesus is always enthralled with our faith when we express it. But when was the last time that you think Jesus was just amazed by your faith? Where he stood back and he said, wow, look at the faith of my child. Look at Steve's faith. Wow. I tell you, I've not found so great a faith even in Israel. If we want to truly please our Heavenly Father, we have to yield to faith. And part of that is we have to yield to his authority. When he speaks, it better get our attention. When I sit in there this morning and Brother Jim preaches, I kind of hope I get flicked in the head.
Sit next to me.
No way I'm sitting next to you now. No way. No way at all, right? But you know what I mean? I don't mean that literally. So no, please, nobody that's sitting around me flick me in the head. I'll probably cry. But you know what I mean? Whenever God speaks, when the Holy Spirit speaks, I better yield. I better obey. Because that's what faith does. Faith yields to authority. Faith says, I believe, I trust in Jesus. So if he's asking me to move, if he's asking me to do something, if he's asking me for whatever it is, my response better be when I get around to it. I'm awful busy this week. No. What should my response be?
Jump.
My response should be, let's get moving, right? Let's get moving. Let's real faith acknowledges Jesus' authority, and because of that, because he is the Son of God, I don't have to wonder how he's going to act on my behalf. I know that whatever it is going to be good. And Jesus prized this quality in the centurion, because the centurion he believed that Jesus had the ability to do what he promised he would do, even without coming into his house. Is Jesus amazed by your faith? And are you yielding to his authority? We need to back up and go to chapter 6 again and lay chapter 6 back in with chapter 7. Listen to Jesus' words to you this morning in chapter 6, verse 46. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? Everyone who comes to me and hears my word, and listen, and acts on them. Faith comes by hearing, right? But then that faith yields to the authority of Jesus, and it turns into action. Everyone who comes to me and hears my word and acts on them, I will show you whom he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid a foundation on the rock. And when the flood occurred and the torrent burst against that house and could not shake it because it had been well built. But the one who has heard and not acted accordingly is like a man who built a house on the ground without any foundation. And when the torrent burst against it, and immediately it collapsed, and the ruin of that house was great. And when he had completed this discourse in the hearing of all the people, he went into Capernaum and he ran into a centurion. Real faith is a yielded faith. Real faith submits and acts according to what God asked of them. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? The centurion understood that. I'm a person of authority. I tell people go, they go. I tell them come, they come. And I see that authority in you. And I submit to that authority. Are we submitting to the authority of Jesus? All right, guys. Next week, we continue on in Luke chapter 8, an expectant faith. So Luke chapter 8, verse 41 through about 56, it looks like, is where we'll be at next week. Don't forget to get signed up to help with Valley Food Kitchen and Christian Challenge. You can sign up on Facebook or see Miss Shelley, okay? Thank you, guys. Have a great day.